our heat equation. We see that we have all the equations on our formula chart. Both of them are right here, and you can find this on your star chart. One that we're going to be using and looking at right now is the heat equation, which is right here, which we see represented as Q equals MC delta T. We see it as listed as CP right there. It's just saying that it's at a certain pressure. And when we're looking at this, what we need to do and understand is that the Q, what it is the heat or heat gained or lost, and that Q is going to be measured in joules. It can be measured in calories, but usually the normal thing that we use is we use joules. M is going to be our mass. It's measured in grams. And then delta T, remember what delta T means? It's change in temperature. And remember what change in means? It's temperature final minus our temperature initial. Okay? And that temperature, we can measure it in Kelvin or Celsius. It just depends on what the answer wants its unit in. But remember, if it just gives you two temperatures, a change in temperature, it doesn't matter what unit it is. And then specific heat is going to be our that little CP value right there. In its unit, depending on what your other units are, if this is in joules, this is in grams, and this is in Celsius, our unit is going to be joules over grams times degrees Celsius. And that'll be our unit for that. Realize what specific heat is. It's a value that every single substance has, and that we use it basically to tell us how much energy it requires to raise the temperature of 1 gram of that substance 1 degree Celsius. Basically, it tells us how much energy can be absorbed by that substance. Some little algebra when we're looking at it, the Q equals MC delta T. When we're looking at this, it'll ask you to solve for specific heat. It'll ask you to solve for the change in temperature. The solving for a variable is pretty simple. If we have to solve for specific heat, obviously we just divide by our M and our delta T. So look at Q over M delta T equals our specific heat. Where people normally get confused on is when they have to solve for an initial temperature or final temperature. Looking at that, remember we just break it up. Q equals MC, and delta T means temperature final minus temperature initial. So when we're looking at that, remember all we have to do, you can go Q over MC and get that over there equals temperature final minus temperature initial. Now if we're solving for our temperature initial, what we have to do is take temperature final to the other side, and then what we'll get is we'll get Q all over MC minus temperature final equals negative temperature initial. And that's the only trick you have to be careful of. Just get rid of that negative and divide both sides by that negative, which will make this positive and it'll make that negative. That's a trick where some people get confused on. Just make sure you pay attention to that. And then if we have this equation and we're solving for our temperature final, all we have to do is just add temperature initial to both sides. So Q all over MC plus temperature initial equals temperature final. That's really the algebra that we have with it. Just making sure we're paying attention to algebra and we'll get it right. Other thing is make sure we're paying attention to how we're plugging it in the calculator. Usually, if you're plugging in the calculator, put the denominator in parentheses. It usually helps a little bit.